And as time went on, I started to become convinced that Islam was the truth. I started to become convinced. My heart started to change. My mind started to change. All I could find were scientific proofs in the Quran. All I could find in my research was the literary miracle of the Quran. And it just dawned on me, why am I not testifying to that which has already entered my heart? And I said to her, I believe, and I need to take my shahada.
What happened that you started to become closer to Islam?
So things became worse at home, considerably worse. There was a lot of kind of DV at home, domestic violence at home. I was affected by that mentally and emotionally. And subhanAllah, Allah placed someone on my path. It was a classmate at secondary school now. And she was a practicing Muslim. Out of all of the Muslim girls in my class, they were quite cultural. But she was, she was very, very practicing. And she was going through something similar at home, but the situation between her parents was actually far worse than mine. Her mum was, subhanAllah, a victim of domestic violence. She was beaten up regularly. And yet, despite that, she was calm. She was at peace. And I remember thinking, your family situation is far worse than mine. I'm falling apart. But you've got it together, and what is it? How are you able to kind of get through this? Because I'm really being affected by this. And she said, it's my faith. It's my faith that gets me through. Now, obviously, I thought I knew who Muslims were, but I also felt that Islam was a very backwards religion. And I developed a great love for this particular friend. We became very, very close. We were completely different. I mean, I was wild. I was a bit crazy, very popular. She was mashallah, a practicing Muslim, and yet we became very, very close. And I started to look into Islam. I started to read articles. At that time, it was listening to tape cassettes. We started to read the Quran for one very arrogant reason, and that was that I wanted to find a contradiction in the faith to save her, because I just felt that the hijab was wrong. I felt that it would hold her back from a successful career, a successful life, I felt, growing up in the area that I did, what I saw, was men walking, 2 miles ahead whilst their wives walked behind them. These were the stereotypes that I had. And so it was interesting because on the one hand, I could see that there was something about this faith that produced this beautiful sense of peace in her. And that on the other hand, this was going to restrict her. This was going to oppress her. This was going to hold her back. So I started, and we used to debate, and, we would talk regularly. And as time went on, I started to become convinced that Islam was the truth, and it terrified me. I started to become convinced. My heart started to change. My mind started to change. I couldn't find anything. All I could find was a comprehensive way of life. All I could find were scientific proofs in the Quran. All I could find in my research was the literary miracle of the Quran. There was nothing. And that scared me, because even though I was young at the time, I've always been the type of person that if I adopt something, if I choose something, I give it 150%. So I knew that as I was beginning to change and I started to become convinced that would mean that I would have to change my life. And that scared me. So fear overcame me. Fear reigned supreme at that time, to the point that I cut off from my friends. I threw away the articles, the leaflets, the cassettes. I put the Quran away. It was becoming too much for me mentally, emotionally. I was afraid of what I believed. I was afraid that I would have to change my life. I wouldn't say that I particularly loved my life, but I was free, right? And to give up your freedom is a very scary thing, particularly when you don't know what you may gain. And now I know what I have gained. So I cut her out and I just carried on with my life. And then I remember revising for my exams. There was a particular weekend where I was revising for my exams, but for some reason, I couldn't concentrate. All I could think about was Islam. All I could think about were the things that I had discovered. It was almost as though I was bombarded by these thoughts, these thoughts about the scientific proofs in the Quran, the existence of God, the proof of, the messengership. And it was just thought after thought after thought. And so I took myself out for a walk. around where I lived at the time, just to get a bit of a breather. I came to a road that I would regularly cross. I stood there waiting for the green man, and the green man came and people were crossing and I just couldn't cross. It felt as though my legs were pinned to the ground. And the thought that was in my mind was, if I cross this road, or in fact any other road, and I'm hit by a car and I die knowing what I know, what I truly know, what would that mean for me? And it just dawned on me. Why am I not testifying to that which has already entered my heart? So I took myself home, called my friend. She picked up the phone, heard my voice, and she was just so happy to hear from me. And I said to her, I believe, and I need to take my shahada. And that was the weekend, and the Monday I took my shahada. Alhamdulillah.
How did your family react to your conversion to Islam?
Being the kind of overzealous, passionate, young person that I was at the time, the way that I told my mother was arriving home, knocking on the door, and her opening the door to me in hijab. Not the best of decisions, I have to say, not the best of decisions. And she looked at me completely confused, and I said, yes, I've become Muslim, and this is me now. She thought it was a phase. Alhamdulillah, it's been a 24-year phase. Alhamdulillah. And it was very, very difficult after that. I lost family, I lost friends. I ended up on my own at a very young age. The first few years after becoming Muslim were very tough.
What was the major challenge you faced after becoming Muslim?
I lost a relationship with my mother. So there were a number of things that happened at the time. She was in a new relationship. That man had a hatred for Islam. He turned her against me. And I remember at the age of 17, it was a very painful moment when she said to me, she looked at me, I was 17, and she said, I've done my job. I no longer need to be your mother, and you're on your own. And that was very, very difficult. At that age, you need your family, and to be rejected by your mother is very, very painful. Very, very painful. So that was hard. And then after that, to then have to fend for yourself at a very young age, to get a job, to be alone, and then a number of other difficulties that I went through at the time, which were quite personal, without family support was really, really hard. So I was living on my own, and I embraced Islam through a particular group, an Islamic group, which I ended up leaving, and then I ended up kind of going to the other extreme. So I went from one extreme to the other extreme. And whilst all of this was happening with my family, I couldn't find where I belonged. And I was new. The transition, the identity crisis that you go through as a new Muslim. So I've faced rejection from my family. I've gone from one Islamic group to another Islamic group, both kind of at the end of, the spectrum. And I couldn't find I couldn't find where I belong. I felt incredibly lonely, that it became too much. And it was in hospital that I called my mother and I said to her, please come and take me home. And I stopped practicing Islam. So I took off my hijab. I stopped praying. I distanced myself from the Muslim community. I still held on to my belief though. And I think I did that because I did become Muslim from a place of rational conviction. It's just that all of the tests that I went through was just too